Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet presented by OTGBasketball.com. Make sure you follow OTG on Twitter at OTGBasketball. Also hit that subscribe button. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, two of my favorites from OTG, Kory, Waldron, Jack Manuell. What's up, guys?
We got the big three in the Wolves, and we got the big three of OTG.
You know, there's a lot of Timberwolves out there, but this Timberwolf team might look more like a direwolf by the end of the season.
Ah, nice Game of Thrones reference. Very nice.
Yeah. Talking Timberwolves today, like you mentioned, they're coming in at number 8 in our rankings. Probably the biggest jump we've seen so far this year, considering last year they're in the 20s. But before we talk about the rank, let's talk about the T-Wolves from last season. Obviously, first year with Tom Thibodeau, 31-51. What are your thoughts on that team?
Look, at that, all the promise in the world going into the season, but that promise, that talent didn't equal wins. They had a mini run in February, but on the back of the Levine injury. But Cat, Wiggins, they were all great, but they just couldn't do enough. In tight games, especially when they played games that were within 5 points in the final 5 minutes, they finished a pretty miserable 15-30. Second only to the Phoenix Suns, which is saying something. Their ability to hold leads as well left much to be desired. Whether that was a product of the youth, inexperience, or Tibbs playing his guys too many minutes, might have been a combination of all. But it was a bit of a disappointing season for the Wolves.
Yeah, incredibly fun to watch. Karl-Anthony Towns and Wiggins on the floor, and obviously when Levine was there, the Bounce Brothers, as they were called. The youth on this team is incredible. Definitely one of the best cores we've seen in the NBA in recent history, recent years, I should say. But like you said, Jack, this was a team where the youth always showed in the second half. They weren't able to hold leads. They weren't able to close out games. They didn't really have that Tom Thibodeau type of defense yet. I mean, as we know, Wiggins kind of lacks the ability to defend to this point of his career. He's more of just an offensive whiz. Towns looks like the complete deal, an absolute stud. They obviously went out and made a couple of huge moves, but last year it was just one of those teams just looking at youth.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, Kory, defense. They're 27th out of 30th in defensive rating, and that's not something you usually see from a Tom Thibodeau team. I thought last year they were a little bit of a disappointment. I had them, not a lock to make the playoffs, but I thought they would at least be in contention for that 8th seed. Did you guys think that they had a shot at the playoffs last year, or it was too early for the young squad?
No, I absolutely thought. You see natural progression from Towns and Wiggins and Levine, and they all did step up, but they, like you mentioned, Nick, they didn't really step up on the defensive end. They were asked to probably do too much on the offensive end. They didn't have a lot of depth to sort of back up. Gorgie Jang, Tyus Jones, Chris Dunn was a real disappointment. Too much was left to their really young big three. But I expected them to, at least push for a top 10 seed. But they were certainly disappointing. And I thought they were at least pushing 40 wins. So to only win 31 was, a big letdown.
Yeah, it definitely was disappointing. I think anytime you see a young core, with Levine, Wiggins, and Towns, they got Tom Thibodeau. Obviously, Ricky Rubio was a solid playmaking point guard. Dang. They had a decent roster last year. I definitely think they underproduced last year. This was definitely a team that could have won at least 40 games. Because like you said, Jack, with that stat of, what was the record? 5 of 37 or whatever in fourth quarter?
That was 15 and 30.
15 and 30.
Yeah, so 40. Right. You flip that around 30-15 or make it an even, 22-23. That's an extra 7 wins for you, and you're pushing that 40 win mark, like you mentioned, Kory.
Yeah, I'd say that's important.
Yeah, and then Zach LaVine obviously hurt him going down, especially because he kind of came on the scene last year. A lot of people were impressed for what he could do. What were your thoughts on Zach LaVine, even though obviously he was traded?
His three-point shot was pretty good. I think he was pushing the 39% range last year from reference. From Basketball Reference, did a bit of research last night. I liked him. We know his athleticism from the dunk contest, probably one of the best dunk contests since Dominique and MJ. But his shooting stroke got a lot smoother. So I thought he was quite impressive. But again, they out of that sort of young big three, none of them had any sort of defensive presence. And you weren't really going to get it from Zach LaVine because he was probably the weakest defensively. But he was certainly lights out from three, probably their best perimeter player.
Yeah, they're definitely going to miss LaVine. It's going to be somewhat sad to see not as many athletic, full-blown dunks from Wiggins and Levine. Levine's now trapped in the desert of Chicago.
Chicago has a desert?
At this rate, it might well be. It's like a wasteland. It's where talent in the NBA goes to die now.
He's making geographical predictions right now too. So.
Yeah, I thought that was Atlanta.
It's what's the name of that movie where the world ends? With Dennis Quaid and Jake Gyllenhaal, The Day After Tomorrow.
Yep.
Chicago's just gonna be a barren wasteland. But yeah, it's unfortunate to see him go, but obviously the guy they got is head and shoulders above him, so it is what it is.
Yeah. Let's talk highlight. Biggest highlight of the Timberwolves season last year.
The year that the cat became a tiger.
I like that.
That's a nice little pun. I'm very punny. That you'll get plenty of them from me, I'm sure, over these OTG pods. But he was top 10 in the following categories: field goals, rebounds, blocks, points, win shares. And did I mention this guy's he's 21 years old? I'll pose a question to you guys. Two questions, sorry. Is he the best center in the NBA? And would you rather have him or Anthony Davis?
Kory, you can swing first.
I think. Oh damn, that's a tough question. I think personally, I go with Karl-Anthony Towns.
Yep, I would as well.
Only because, he's only 21 years old. He's already shown that he can hit the three. He's already a decent really good rebounder, a decent defender who can probably get a little bit better. And just the age, I think he has just so much upside, especially being so young still. Anthony Davis obviously can get better, as we talked about in previous podcasts. His ceiling, he's not quite there yet, but for Davis, averaging 30 and 12 seems to be right about what he's going to do. Average maybe 2.5 to 3 blocks. Davis is a stud in his zone, but I think there's more of a scoring punch from Towns that I like.
Yep.
I think the one thing that can make this easy discussion is we don't really have much injury concern, knock on wood, for Karl-Anthony Towns. But at this point for Anthony Davis, it's unlikely for him to play, 70-plus games a lot of seasons, or, even play a full game sometimes because he's so banged up. And like you guys said, Towns is just a hair younger, and that kind of makes a difference. Also, I'm not throwing shade at Anthony Davis. I think Karl-Anthony Towns might have a higher basketball IQ, though. He just has an extremely good feel for the game. Just coming in from his rookie season, you could see that he just knows how to play ball. Also, I love his off-the-court personality in terms of how he handles interviews and stuff. So I think that's great. I'm all on Cat. And I think last year he might not have been the best big in the NBA, but I think this season, I think he's going to make some strides defensively. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later.
For sure.
I think he'll be top 3. When the season's all said and done, I think we'll be looking at Towns as definitely a top 3 center.
The fact that he didn't make All-Star last year was a bit of a travesty. And there was an article with Mark Spears on the Undefeated, and he was asked by Spears, by Mark, does he think that he can become the best player in the NBA? And he responded with confidence but humility at the same time. He's like, it's definitely something that I can see in his sight. I think he's a future MVP candidate because he's 21. You mentioned, Nick, his basketball IQ. He plays like he's been in the NBA for 10 years.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, the one thing that's obviously really positive, too, is the jump he made from the previous season to last season. His scoring went up, his rebounding went up, and he didn't even lose efficiency in his field goal percentage, and his three-point shot got better. So, if I'm a Timberwolves fan, and not to mention, they had some nice young talent on their roster with Andrew Wiggins and Zach LaVine, but now you add a experienced dude like Jimmy Butler and Jeff Teague. I'm really excited for what Karl-Anthony Towns is going to do this year.
Definitely.
But your highlight player, Kory, or highlight play?
My highlight player is going to be Wiggins. Because Wiggins, defensively, we can say what we will. We know LeBron had that stick between the legs pass between Andrew Wiggins' legs for an easy dunk when they faced up last year. But we saw Wiggins get better. He went from averaging 20 points per game to 23. His three-point percentage raised from 30% to 35%. Field goal percentage slightly dropped. But this was a guy who we saw offensively. Near the end of the season, especially in that February run that you mentioned, Jack, Wiggins and Towns were both averaging 35 points per game, it felt like. It felt like every night those two guys were putting up huge numbers for the Wolves. And obviously, I'm not sure if Wiggins, signed that extension he was offered, but they offered him like $142 million. So we know he's going to get paid relatively soon. But for me, it was Wiggins, man. He definitely offensively grew as a player.
I'm going with the big cat, like Jack. Like he said, he turned into a tiger. Maybe he'll turn into a lion soon. So I'm pretty excited for what he did. I mentioned it, the stats boost and just, the able to stay efficiency. And I think there's more of a jump he can make this year. But biggest disappointment for Timberwolves last season?
I'm piggybacking off of what you said, Nick. Apart from their paltry win-loss record, for me, it's got to be their defense. That 27th ranking you mentioned, I actually literally had written down. And, when you've got a defensive savant in Tom Thibodeau, it's something that was really surprising. You'd think that at least be pushing that top half of the NBA because they were a top 10 offense. So it was just really surprising that they were in that bottom half, with the Denver Nuggets and your Phoenix Suns of the world.
I'm going with the Wolves bench unit. When Wiggins and Towns weren't on the floor, this team wasn't very good. They had to rely heavily on guys like Shabazz Muhammad, who I'm really glad they re-signed. Chris Dunn was pretty much, caca last year. They brought in guys like Lance Stevenson for a stretch. Didn't really work out. Adrian Payne saw some minutes. No one on their bench unit really sustained any time on the floor, really. Everyone seemed to struggle. And when that happened, Towns and Wiggins had to play 37 minutes per game. That's right around the top of the league. And like we've mentioned with Tom Thibodeau, he's known as a guy who kind of overworks his players. And, near the late of the game, I think you could see that.
Yeah, Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns may have been, the top duo to only play 82 games last year because, Tibbs didn't give him a game off. Obviously, They didn't make the playoffs, so that's something to keep an eye on. Like we mentioned before on previous pods, he's definitely worn down some guys. Look at Luol Deng, Joakim Noah. Derrick Rose is kind of banged up, but that's more of injury than Thibodeau, but probably a combination of a little bit. But for me, I think you guys both made great points. Defense, bench unit. I'm just going to go with disappointment on something they can't control, and that was the Zach LaVine injury. Like, I'd like to see what he would have done if he stayed the whole season because it just felt like he was kept getting better, and I really don't know how good he could have been. And I think ACL tears, we mentioned that, the medical field is a lot further along, but they're still going to have an impact on you. He's never going to be quite the same as what he was before the injury.
No, you look at guys like Barry Parker and Derrick Rose, I think it lends Levine's game to be working more on that, less on that explosive athleticism and more on that sort of mid-range game, his three-point shot, a bit more crafty rather than the explosive athleticism that we know from him.
I mean, I'm not going to lie, I think he can still be relatively close to the player he is. I don't think he'll lose a lot of bounce from the first. I mean, just because I look at a guy like Jabari Parker, off the first knee injury last year, he was still relatively had the bounce. And even Derrick Rose, if I can recall, after the first one from that Philly series, he still had some bounce the next year. He just couldn't stay healthy. So to me, I think he'll still have the bounce. It's just the matter of fact, will the knee be able to sustain keeping up the same type of play that he's been known for?
Yeah, because
I think he'll still have bounce. Like it'll just be more of the bounce that we see from really athletic players because you could probably make the argument last year that Zach LaVine was one of the top athletes in the NBA in terms of vertical leap.
Oh, easily.
You know what I mean? I think that he'll still maintain that level, but I don't know if, Derrick Rose was super explosive, but I don't think when he came back, he wasn't quite the same level of explosiveness. And Jabari Parker, yeah, he was explosive and he definitely had his bounce last year, but he wasn't a guy that was playing above the rim quite the same way as like a Zach LaVine. But like Jack mentioned, I think the fact that he was able to improve his three-point shot, it kind of gives us more hope that he can kind of get back to that level. But like you said, Kory, playing in the desert of Chicago, it's going to be a tough ride for him. But let's talk rankings. I mentioned they're in at number 8, probably the biggest jump we've seen so far. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's too high, too low, fair, what?
I think it's not short-sighted, but I think it's relatively fair. But I mentioned in previous pods before, like the difference in ceiling and basement for teams. And this team has a huge ceiling. So I think that's where this ranking is coming from. But I'm still skeptical just based on the fact that they're still an unknown commodity. They've got great talent now, like with the acquisition of Bartlow, Gibson, Crawford that we'll be talking about. I think adding those guys, it makes it a relatively fair ranking. but at the same time, they've still got to gel. And it's like with a lot of these new big super teams, it's going to be, there's a lot of storylines surrounding all of them. And Minnesota has one of the more intriguing ones for sure.
I love this starting five. This starting five, I think, I compare, like Nick, you have that skewed scale. I look at everyone in comparison to the Warriors. And, the Warriors having to go against a starting five like this is not an easy starting five. The bench units probably will be what, is what the game is decided on. But I really like this young starting five. Obviously, chemistry, you have to see how that goes. But I think an 8 rating is really fair for the Wolves.
I could see, if someone wanted to make an argument that they could be a little bit lower just because of the roster turnover and they're going to have to get things together. Especially, this is a team that I imagine having some struggles during the season at some points trying to gel. But then when it comes playoff time, they're going to be elite. Kind of like Jack said, the ceiling is definitely very high. The basement isn't very low either. So, I'm okay with this. I wouldn't be mad if someone wanted to, push another team above them just because they've proven a little bit more. And I could see a little bit of a rocky start. And like you guys mentioned, the bench unit is still not something I'm feeling very confident about. But let's talk additions. They made a huge trade on draft night. They picked up Jimmy Butler, and they're able to get a pick swap in that trade too. They traded the 7th pick, and they still ended up with a 16th pick. They drafted Justin Patton, a high potential center, somebody who's kind of raw, but they can kind of work him behind Karl-Anthony Towns for a few years and see what he can become.
Yeah, I like him a lot. He unfortunately broke his foot and is likely to miss the majority of training camp. But like you mentioned, a huge offensive upside, great athleticism, good length, great in transition. He's perfect for today's very sort of versatile unicorn NBA. And I think he's in a great position, as you mentioned, to sort of work behind Cat, learn from a Cat, learn from defensively from a veteran like Taj Gibson. How KG had that influence on Cat for that rookie year, and I think the same thing could happen for Patton once he gets himself healthy. I'm not saying he's going to be a Rookie of the Year contender, but he's in a great situation.
Big Money. That's his nickname. Big Money.
Big Money.
That's a good nickname.
Yeah, it is. They could definitely use some help at that power forward center position. This is a guy who's only going to be 20 years old. So this is another baby. Towns is 21, but this core is extremely young. I'm not sure how much Thibodeau will play him, especially early on. I doubt we even see him coming off that injury. But, it's a solid player. He averaged 12 and 6 in college in 35 minutes per game, shot 53% from 3. I'm not sure how many attempts that was, but he took, 67% from the field. This is a guy who can score, it looks like. It just depends on if he can stay healthy and if Thibodeau wants to use him early on.
Yeah, and he's a guy, and they're in a really good situation with him because they don't have to play him. They have other bigs to play. I think he's only 19 years old, so somewhat of a raw prospect. But I know a lot of the OTG draft guys, they're pretty high on him and what he could do in the future after he develops his game. So he's somebody to keep an eye on. And like we talked about when the trade happened, the fact that the Timberwolves were able to get another high pick, a 16 pick is not a bad pick at all, and get another young asset for this roster. That trade was just such a steal. So, but talking about the trade, obviously they traded the number 7 pick, Chris Dunn, Zach LaVine for Jimmy Butler in the 16 pick. So they picked up a player like Jimmy Butler in this offseason. If they just did that and nothing else, I think you could probably give them an A grade for the offseason, but they were able to add more. But what were your thoughts on Jimmy Butler and what he can bring to this Timberwolves team?
A league signing. He posted career highs in scoring, rebounds, assists, player efficiency rating, win shares. Him, Cat, and Wiggins, and what a trio that's going to be. I'm sure, like you mentioned, Kory and Nick, that the Warriors are going to have something on their hands there because they do struggle when it comes to elite big men, and Cat is an elite big man. And I think if Wiggins can develop a bit on the defensive end, I think Butler eases the load and influences Wiggins on a really big level. He's going to be a huge mentor for him. And that, I think, once he signs that max contract eventually, Jimmy Butler's going to be his dude.
Well, I think the one nice thing about getting Jimmy Butler is that you have someone who will guard the number 1 option for the other team all the time. Like Wiggins won't have to worry about guarding a Kevin Durant for giant stretches. We won't have to worry about guarding Kawhi Leonard. Jimmy Butler is going to get all the tough defensive assignments now, which is good because, Wiggins has to prove that he can defend at this level. But you're getting Jimmy Butler, a guy who knows Tom Thibodeau's system, who Thibodeau, I'm sure, is ecstatic to have back on his team. Like you said, his numbers went up across the board last year. There was a few times where he had, or he was close to having a triple-double, if not had a triple-double. This is a guy who's also a very good passer. Jimmy Butler is a bona fide stud. And, the Timberwolves, I would never think they would acquire a guy like Jimmy Butler in a trade on draft night. If anyone told me that was going to happen, I'd say you're crazy.
Honestly, I was super hyped for the move. I had a feeling, they did have interest in Butler at some point, and then the relationship with Thibodeau. So I was like, this could be a possible landing spot, but it was pretty dry for a while. A lot of the talk was obviously Boston. But like you guys mentioned, I think he's just going to ease the load for the young guys offensively, defensively. And then this is somebody who can close out games. We saw him last year. He had games where he was terrible in the first half, and then he would drop 20 or 30 in the second half, and he'd lead the Bulls to a win. Just having a guy like that, and like you said, defensively, Jack, somebody who can lock, like, he's not, a bad defender at all. He's an elite defender. He's one of the best two-way guys in the league. And if he can just rub off on Andrew Wiggins a little bit, and he can become a pretty good defender, this team could play some nice defense, especially on the perimeter.
Hypothetically, boys, would you rather have Jimmy Butler or Paul George on your roster? I mean, Kory's probably going to have a biased opinion here. But as objectively speaking as you can, both of these guys are super elite two-way wings. Who would you prefer to have on your team? You're building a new team. Who's your foundation guy?
All right, so I've been asked this question probably more times than I can count. And I can promise you –
I'm sorry.
I can promise you I don't – I'm very unbiased when it comes to this. I would pick Paul George. And the reason is because Jimmy Butler is one of those scorers who really needs the ball in his hands to be effective. He's not really an off guard or an off wing type of player. Paul George can work decently well, and I think will work decently well in his new system, playing off ball. Paul George is a very good catch and shoot shooter. And he's very good at moving around on the floor. He's an above average wing defender. He might not be as good as he used to be post leg injury, but I think he's just as good as he was. And he's, last year he shot extremely high from three. Jimmy Butler, he's just starting to get a 3-point shot. It's not very consistent. For me, I think Paul George is the better all-around player.
Yeah, this is like one of those decisions where, to be honest, like my head is kind of pointing me towards Jimmy Butler, but there's just something about Paul George. Like, I think Paul George, I don't know what it is about him. I think maybe it's just in my brain about him battling with LeBron in the playoffs and being the best player on some really good teams. And not to take anything away from Jimmy Butler, but, he was the best player on the Bulls team that wasn't very good. And the other Bulls team, he was more of a, second or third option type player. So it's still a really close debate. And I think the one thing maybe that gives Paul George an advantage, he's a year younger. And it's tough, though. I mean, you could really go with either guy here. And this discussion has been going on since the trade deadline with Boston being interested in both guys. But I think I'm going to agree with you, Kory. I think I'll go with Paul George. I don't know maybe I just like his lankiness as well.
I mean, Paul George, for what it's worth, too. I've mentioned this before. In big game moments, Paul George has never not been there. He's a gamer. I mean, even last year in the playoffs against the Cavs, all 4 games, Paul George was in it. I would say it didn't translate to wins. But, I mean, when they play against big-time opponents, Paul George seems to always be there. And to me, that sticks out.
Kory, I'll actually counter that. I did some research for the Thunder pod. Stay tuned for that one, OTG guys. And he's actually one of the worst shooters when it comes to the fourth quarter.
Yes.
Yes. And
here we go.
I hate to burst your bubble, but
I know
Carmelo Russ. It was on NBA TV, and I saw a screenshot. Paul George is 15 of 84 from the field, 18%, 17.9%. In the last 6 seasons when the scores have been within 3 points in the last minute of a fourth quarter. So he's going to take the shots. I mean, last year, I think in the Cavs, he was disappointed watching that game. And I believe it was CJ Miles who took that shot. And he was pretty pissed and that he didn't get that shot. Whereas when I watched it, I'm like, CJ had a decent look. I feel like if you want to get the win. You'd rather just give it to the guy who's got the best look. Paul George should have touched the ball in that possession, but that was more of a breakdown due to the other players. But CJ Miles still had a decent look.
Tell that to Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan, that a role player had a better look than the superstar on the team. The superstar always gets the last look. I mean, yes, it was a good shot. It is what it is. If that goes in, there's nothing to talk about. I think Paul George had every right to say, that he wanted the ball, because that's what I want out of my star player. And yes, he's been very poor in the last minute of the game, but I saw him beat the Jazz last year. He had a crossover jump shot over Gordon Hayward for a win. I saw him dunk a ball late over Portland in Indiana to win. And I saw him take the Cavs to overtime the regular season. So they lost that game. It's whatever, because they're not in a game late in the fourth quarter unless Paul George is scoring 20 points in that fourth quarter to keep them even close.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think you just give him props for being willing to take the shot, even if he hasn't had the success. It's still something you want to see out of a guy. But I mean, anytime we're in these like player comparison things, I think always you have to not to play be that annoying one, but it's always the situation of the other team, the team that your team's in. One player is going to fit better in one situation, one player is going to fit better in another situation or another system. So that's always a big impact. But I think both these guys are probably going to have great seasons. But let's get back to the Timberwolves. Obviously, other than trading for Jimmy Butler, huge move. They're able to pick up another, great player in Jeff Teague. That's somebody Kory's watched a lot with the Pacers last year. What were your thoughts on him, guys?
Kory, you go first, mate, because I reckon you've got plenty of stuff to say about your boy Jeff Teague out in Indiana.
Yeah, fair enough. I respect it. Jeff Teague, Mr. I played all 82 games last year. Yeah, I didn't miss a single game, which
he'll fit right in.
Yeah. I love that. Very good attacking and dishing point guard. He was top 3 in drawing 4-point plays, which only Lou Williams and James Harden did better. Excuse me. Fantastic. I mean, I think offensively with Ricky Rubio, they were lacking scoring. Obviously, playmaking-wise, I think Rubio is probably slightly better of a passer. Jeff Teague did average a career high in assists. But, I mean, offensively now you have a point guard who can shoot the ball a little bit. He can drive and get to the basket. Very good free throw shooter. The Jeff Teague move was really underrated.
Yeah.
I liked it too. And you mentioned that 3-point shot, Kory. He wasn't great from 3 last year, but the year before with Atlanta, he was 40% from the perimeter. So he certainly has the capabilities to be, a knockdown shooter from there. And they're certainly going to need it because that's what they really lacked last year. And he's probably going to be playing a lot of off-ball with, when you're playing alongside a Jimmy Butler, who is going to be doing some playmaking and floor general sort of stuff as well. So I like him as well. He had a career high 17 assists against Chicago. So it was really low-key, really good year. And I think he's going to – when there was rumors around going with like George Hill or Jeff Teague, I was toing and froing as to who would be a better fit. And I think either you take it, you're sort of like, you're flipping the coin sort of like with the Jimmy Butler, Paul George debate. Either one is going to be great in this system. George Hill probably has slightly better from the perimeter, but Jeff Teague is just as good on any given night as well.
Yeah, I think George Hill would have given them shooting and a better defensive side, but Jeff Teague gives them more of that offensive pop attacking the rim. But I think one thing, either if they added either of those guys, but Jeff Teague will bring this is the 3-point shot. Last year, Ricky Rubio can't shoot threes. I love my spacing and my shooting, especially for my point guard. So I think just having a guy like Jeff Teague is going to open up the floor so much more for everybody on the Timberwolves offense.
Yeah, and, I think the match between Jeff Teague and George Hill, George Hill obviously would be a better defender, but, you really need the playmaking of a guy like Jeff Teague. I think him and Cat in the pick and roll will be really fun to watch. Even him and Taj Gibson in the pick and roll. Jeff Teague is used to running pick and roll, and I think Jeff Teague is a very smart point guard, and I think this will pay dividends later on in the season. Sorry about that.
No, I'm all for Jeff Teague. I thought they needed obviously to get a point guard when they added Jimmy Butler and they added some other pieces and having these guys and somebody who can pass the ball. And I know Kory, you mentioned this to me last year. You were kind of impressed a little bit by Jeff Teague as a passer. So that's something we'll see this year. They also picked up Jamal Crawford and Taj Gibson, two veterans. Obviously, both guys have already probably played their best basketball, more so Jamal Crawford. Taj still has some gas in the tank, but what are your thoughts on these two?
Yeah, Taj still has some gas in the tank. He's yet to hit that 30 mark. Jamal Crawford's on the downward spiral, but with Taj, you know what you're going to get. I think with both of these guys, you know what you're going to get. Maybe less so Jamal Crawford, because he probably had one of his poor years last year. Taj is going to go out, play 25, 30 minutes for you. He's going to give you 8 to 10 points, give you 6 to 8 boards, be a real defensive monster under there. He's got some real grit about him. And Jamal Crawford, he's buckets. It's simple as that. He's got some of the best handles in the league. I'm hoping we can still see some highlights, and Tibbs still allows him to play with that freedom because he's a one-man highlight reel sometimes. But he adds to the depth that they didn't really have last year. And it's still a bit shallow, but they've at least got someone off that bench now. Because we were mentioning earlier, they didn't really have anyone.
Yeah. I mean, does Taj Gibson start next year? Or does he come off the – I mean, we'll talk about that in a second probably. Taj Gibson, though, yeah, I mean, that's a workhorse. Another guy who's been with Thibodeau, knows the system. He's a gritty defender. I'm not a huge fan of the fit only because of how, as we know, the league is changing over to the face-up fours and the stretch fours. And Taj Gibson, he's just getting up there in age, and there's going to be a point in time where, he's just around the basket too much. And I think that's going to hurt spacing, especially with a guy like Towns. I mean, I guess maybe Towns could maybe play like a 4 and you have Taj play like a little 5 or like something weird where the floor spacing is different on the court. And then Jamal Crawford, Jay Crossover, Jay Smooth. I mean, if that bench unit already has Shabazz Muhammad, the guy who doesn't pass the ball, Jamal Crawford isn't known for passing a giant amount, but he's obviously a top 6 man in the league, 3-time winner. Hopefully he's just a shell of – he doesn't even have to be a shell of himself. As long as he's on the floor, Jay Crossover will still put some kind of impact on the court just because of who he is. I feel like sometimes even when you get older, like a Manu Ginobili, you can still have this effect on the court where your presence is felt in different ways.
Yeah.
I think one thing, like you said, his presence is going to be felt in other ways, and just the fact that, I think with Taj Gibson, you guys mentioned the toughness, and then, being a veteran guy that's already played in the Thibs system is going to be somebody he can kind of rely on to play that defense that he's looking for. 27th out of 30, like we mentioned, is not something you're going to be very fond of. And Jamal Crawford for the hand, he's somebody I'm not really that high on. I think he just looked a little bit like he lost it last year, and the inefficiency is something that can hurt. But with the lack of scoring on this team, I think, they had no choice but to go and get him. You mentioned it earlier, Kory, they re-signed Shabazz Muhammad, which I'm not personally a huge fan of. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Look, he signed for the vet minimum. He was apparently offered more from the Lakers, but not an astronomical amount. I think it was something around the range of $4 or $5 million over a couple of years. So I think he's sort of banking on himself in a way, have a decent year off that bench, sort of prove himself. Maybe he adds another string to his bow, whether that's a 3-point shot, whether that's some sort of defensive presence. But I like it for the price, and because he adds to that depth. The fit, not the best, in terms of, Kory was mentioning about with Jamal Crawford, both of them don't pass, both of them just want to get buckets. But, he adds to the depth of that roster, and, if someone's going to go down, at least they've got some fill-ins with those guys.
I mean, the man had 35 total assists last season. He played in 78 games, scored 772 points, and had 35 assists.
35 more than you, Kory.
You're right. And he had 22 steals. He almost had more steals than total assists, which is hilarious.
And I think even the bigger number that was crazier than that, I saw it on Twitter at some point, was the amount of passes he made. Comparison to the other NBA players, it was ridiculous. Not just the assists, but in terms of, he gets the ball, he's just trying to score. He's not going to really pass it. The thing I don't like about him, especially with this team, is the lack of 3-point shot. If they had some more bigs that could shoot the 3 ball, I'd be more okay with it. But his lack of spacing on this team will kind of hurt them. In my opinion.
Yeah, unless he develops a 3-point shot, like Jack mentioned. I mean, if he can play a little more defense too, then maybe it works. But right now, between him and Jamal Crawford, both those guys aren't solid knockdown 3-point shooters, especially if Crawford takes another step back.
Yeah, definitely. So and it's weird, we'll kind of talk about this team in a little bit, and that could probably be one of their flaws is their 3-point shooting. But let's talk departures. They lost quite a few guys. Omri Caspery, Jordan Hill, Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, Adrian Payne, Ricky Rubio, Brandon Rush. You know, obviously Rubio they lost, but they were able to pick up Jeff T. We mentioned Zach LaVine earlier. What are your thoughts on losing Chris Dunn? You know, obviously last year he was not what we thought he would be, and now he's going to be in Chicago. Do you think they, you know, shipped him off too soon, or he's not going to look like he's going to have a good NBA career?
Nah, done is done in Minnesota. I'm full of puns today, fellas. Funnily enough, he was actually my initial pick for Rookie of the Year going into last season, so I was horribly off the mark. You know, he was losing out on minutes to Tyus Jones, who was a third-string point guard, and Tyus Jones superseded him in the rotation. His ability to shoot and score leaves a lot to be desired, but he has a nice defensive ceiling. I think he can probably be, if he maintains health, be what Michael Carter Williams could have been had he been healthy.
Yeah, disappointing, I guess, that first year. I mean, the Bulls still loved him.
Yeah.
With Chris Dunn. You're getting Jimmy Butler, so you're not really going to miss him that much. I mean, I really don't think they miss any of these guys terribly. It's kind of just, you know, the changing of the guard. You know, they're making some moves to better the roster. Some guys have to go. You know, and this team, it's not like this team last year was winning basketball games at a giant click. So it's not like the worst thing. Obviously, Chris Dunn's a little bit of a disappointment, though. And I think losing Zach LaVine, you probably lose a small fan, like some part of the fan base is probably upset. I'm sure they would have wanted to see what the Bounce Brothers and Cat could have been. But you got Jimmy Butler, so shut up.
Yeah, I think you hit it, you know, Kory. Kind of every guy they lost, they kind of have a replacement for him. The only one, I mean, Omri Caspery is somebody I think that would have been a nice bench piece, but weren't able to keep him. But I think, you know, having a guy that can play the three, play the floor, and can hit the three ball would have been a nice piece to have. But let's talk starters. Who's breaking at?
He's really underrated. I just want to say that Caspi is really underrated. You know, and of course he went to the Golden State Warriors, so now they have another small forward, small ball power forward.
Amazing fit for
Caspi everywhere he goes. Yeah, Caspi is great at being a knockdown 3-point shooter.
Yeah, one of my highlights last year was actually Caspi. I think he was on the Kings, and him going at it against Kory, and they were just like knocking down the threes like it was no tomorrow. Like Caspi was lights out, Kory was lights out. It was just like one of my highlights of the season. It was just, you know, super fun to watch. And I don't know, is there anyone on the Warriors that can't shoot a three apart from? Well, no, JaVale McGee apparently can after, you know, his off season.
Yeah, maybe just Zaza Pachulia.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, like Sean Livingston doesn't really shoot threes, but I mean, I've seen him get lucky and hit like one at the end of a half or something like that. But let's talk starters. Who's starting for the Timberwolves? I think this is pretty easy other than probably one position.
Yeah, and that position's the power forward position. You know, you got Jeff T, Andrew Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, and at the 5 you got Karl Anthony Towns, obviously. But it's a toss up between Jang or Gibson. I'm leaning towards Jang just because he gives them a little bit more shooting, not that much. I mean, Gibson, I think he gives a bit more grittiness, a bit more defensive presence. He can get buckets. You know, he's going to give you offensive like boards and stuff off the bench. So I think, you know, if Jamal Crawford and Shabazz Muhammad are just shooting and just chucking up bricks, at least you got Gibson up there to sort of rebound them and, you know, maybe give them some second chance points. But I don't know. I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I'm rolling with the no-brainers for 1, 2, 3, and 5, and I think they go with Jang or Dang as well.
Yeah, Jang.
At the 4. This is a guy who can shoot the 3 a little bit too, if I recall from last season. He stretched out a little bit. 0.5 attempts per game, so that number doesn't really matter to me. But I think he's just a little bit younger than Taj, probably a little bit faster. He's really good defender, a decent rim protector. You know, Taj hasn't been able to block more than over a shot per game for the last 3 years. He's averaging just under like 0.8. I think defensively, Deng will probably be better to start the season. Have Taj kind of come off the bench of that enforcer role. But then the fear is that bench unit with Jamal Crawford, Shabazz, and Taj. I mean, there's no shooters on that bench unit then.
Yeah. I mean, Gorgie Deng, like you said, he's not much of a shooter either. So it's kind of a weird position for them. I think it all depends on Thibodeau. You know, he might go with Gibson because that's his guy from Chicago, but breakout starter, who's breaking out in that starting lineup?
Get wiggy with it. I'm going with Andrew Wiggins. Last season he was the ninth perimeter player to average 23 points a game at age 21 or younger, which is no small feat. If he signs the max, he's going to have to be a breakout player. The obvious area we've mentioned before, he needs to improve on that defensive end, but the addition of Butler helps that, and I think his overall efficiency and passing will improve too, just because it makes everything so much easier.
Yeah, Wiggins is a good pick. And I think also, I don't know how much this really plays into it, but I always feel like it does. The media has been extremely critical of him, just like they've been of other guys, about his defense and does he really deserve the max contract. I truly believe that players hear these talks. And I truly believe that Wiggins, getting a stud with Jimmy Butler next to him, having a point guard in Jeff Teague, I think Wiggins will have one of his probably more efficient years. And I do think defensively he'll be better. I'm going to roll with the easy choice. I'm going with Karl-Anthony Towns. I think there is absolutely no weight on his shoulders having all these pieces around him. I think we'll be able to see him run, more flourishly, run around more offensively, be able to do more with, the less attention having, a Jimmy Butler and an Andrew Wiggins and a Jeff Teague on the floor at one time with him. I mean, it's hard you can't guard every single person 100% on the floor. So someone will be left open at times. And I just think Karl-Anthony Towns is due to have, 20s, right around 25 points per game again, probably because they have to share the ball more. 12 to 13 rebounds, almost 2 blocks per game. I'm looking for him to have a big season.
Yeah, I'm going with Big Cat as well. I think Andrew Wiggins could have another big year too. The only thing I see with Wiggins is I think his shots are going to come down a little bit with Jimmy Butler coming there, where I think Karl-Anthony Towns is going to feed off the guys a little bit more. I think the fact, like I mentioned, Jeff Teague being able to shoot the 3 ball, Ricky Rubio could not shoot the 3. So that was just like having an extra help defender all the time. And I think that kind of forced Cat out of the paint a little bit more than he would like. So this year, I think he's going to be able to get inside a little bit more. I also expect him to improve defensively, become a more consistent rim protector, and just overall. And then assist-wise, I think he averaged around 2.7 last year. With the players they have, I think averaging around 4 assists is not out of this realm. Breakout bench guy.
It's hard to choose. If you got Taj, maybe, but I'm going with Shabazz Muhammad purely because it's a contract year for him. He has to prove it. If he wants to get money next year, and we know a lot of NBA players have those big years and then, they might drop off, i.e. Evan Turner when he got that contract out in Portland, had a big year with Boston, then dropped off completely. So I think Shabazz Muhammad has to break out, has to add, as we were mentioning, another string to his bow in terms of his skill set, whether it's a 3-point shot, whether it's, some passing, whether it's just overall efficiency in defense and offense. So for me, Shabazz is going to have a great year.
I like when you do one of me and you roast someone and then you talk about them as their breakout player. Makes you feel good, Jack.
Absolutely.
Taking one out of the Kory book.
We've done so many pods together, I can't not.
I like it. You're like Kobe stealing parts of Jordan's game. I respect it. Not that I'm Jordan. I don't want to draw that comparison. I'm rolling with. This is tough because I don't want to pick Shabazz Muhammad, but then who the hell else am I gonna pick? Yeah, I'll pass. I'll hard pass. They did get Aaron Brooks, another ex-Pacer, another ex-Chicago Bull. What a stud! But I'm gonna go with Jamal Crawford, which is also quite funny that I'm saying that.
You playing so much.
Obviously, as me and Nick mentioned, he did take a step back in his game last year. There was more times I saw Jamal Crawford do a crossover that ended up in a brick instead of a jump shot. And the first time watching him play, he was still rather close in the 6-man conversation. Obviously, he's always around that talk. He's going to be 37 years old. This is near the time where you're reaching the true end of your basketball career because you lose your speed and your ability to bounce back night in and night out. But they need someone on this bench unit. They need someone to rally the guys. I mean, Tyus Jones, that's still a sophomore baby. Shabazz Muhammad, a guy doesn't pass the ball, 35 assists. Taj Gibson, who knows what he can give you. Backup center-wise, I'm not even sure if they have a lot for a backup center. I mean, I guess it's probably Cole Aldridge. Yikes. So you're really going to need Jamal Crawford to either, run this second show and be able to get other guys involved. But you need him to be that offensive six-man that we've seen in L.A. and with the Knicks prior and the Hawks.
See, I'm a little bit higher on some of the young guys they have. I think Tyus Jones could make a jump this year at the backup point guard position. This I think is maybe his third year in the league, and he showed a little bit of promise. So this is kind of the year for him. Another guy that we didn't really talk about, I'm going to try to pronounce his last name, Bielitsa.
Yep.
He's a guy I think that is going to get minutes at the 4, and I think he's a guy that could see more minutes because he can shoot the ball from the perimeter. And you mentioned the backup center position. I think they're probably going to keep like a 3-man rotation in terms of true bigs, where you'll see maybe a Gorgie Dang or a Taj Gibson at center, especially with the way the NBA is going. And Bielitsa is a guy that could be in one of their closing lineups just for the impact they'll have spacing-wise. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. And they do have other young guys on this roster that I think that can still get better. So that what even makes this more exciting. They added these huge veterans this year, but they also have young players that can take another jump. Let's talk.
I just want to say, Tyus Jones, looking at his numbers, I mean, he definitely did get shooting-wise last year. He was certainly better. He just didn't play a lot. He lost minutes last season.
Yeah.
But like you said, Nick, they definitely need someone to step up to that backup point guard role because Jeff T can't play 48 minutes. And I don't know if you really want Aaron Brooks on the floor. So Tyus Jones is going to have an opportunity to play some big-time minutes early.
Yeah, and all Tyus Jones has to do, I think he shoots a high percentage from 3. He just got to set up the offense, run the show, and just have things run smooth. Like we mentioned, they have some talent. They're going to stagger minutes. There's not really going to be a point on the floor where you don't have a Andrew Wiggins, a Karl-Anthony Towns, or a Jimmy Butler. So I think they'll be okay. But let's talk wins. Best case scenario for the Timberwolves next year.
Look, it's really odd to say because so much has changed with this team. From a mid-30 win team, I think that they've got the potential to, if it all clicks, to go mid to high 50s, maybe a 55 to a 57 win team. That probably gets you a 4th seed out west. I think it's got to be the year that they surely break the playoff drought out in Minnesota. But yeah, it's a big ceiling, like we've mentioned.
Best case scenario. It's funny because 31 wins it feels like that's out of the realm of questions from last year to this year. I think best case scenario I'll say is 51-31.
I knew you were gonna flip it.
They flip the record around. They end up being that 4 seed because I think the top 3 teams in the West all win 55 to 60 games each. So I say 4th is probably the highest ceiling for them.
Yeah, I think 4 is probably the highest, and that's with one of the top 4 teams in the West taking a step back. Because right now, personally, I don't have them above Golden State, Houston, San Antonio, or even OKC at this point. So I think, best case for me, I'm a little bit lower on them. I think long-term, they still have a lot of potential, but this year, highest I really see them grabbing is 52. I think just because you have to remember, they're bringing in a lot of new pieces like a Jeff Teague, a Jimmy Butler, guys who are going to touch the ball a lot. So there could be some real struggles. So I think 52. Playoff-wise, I don't think they can get to the Western Conference Finals. So I think best case in that term would be second round. Worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario is that they somehow miss the playoffs. I can't see it happening because when you got 3 guys, even if one of them, as I mentioned with the Wizards, you keep one of them healthy at least, then at least you've got the talent to run around him, whether it's Cat, whether it's Butler, whether it's Wiggins. It's just so hard to see the amount of talent on this roster that they miss the playoffs. Maybe they get a 9th seed. Maybe Portland somehow kick around there still. Maybe somehow the Grizzlies keep defying odds and keep their position as well. But I think Minnesota take the jump and automatically take Memphis Grizzlies' spot.
I mean, I don't think Memphis is a playoff team regardless, so I can definitely see that. My worst-case scenario for them is like 42-40. I do think this team finishes over 500. I don't see them falling underneath that. I think they're too good. Starting 5 at least is too good to lose more games and winning games. Obviously, going 42-40, that doesn't guarantee you a spot in the playoffs in the West. So that also ties into, like you said, Jack, that worst case scenario, them missing the playoffs again after getting a guy like Jimmy Butler and Jeff Teague.
Yeah, I think I have them in worst case is just fighting for that 8th seed. Things don't really work out, but like you guys mentioned, there's enough star power on this team to kind of maintain the flow. And I think another year under Thibs, they're going to be a better defensive team. So I think, 42, 44 wins, worst case scenario, but they still sneak in the 8th seed, and they still aren't going to be a fun matchup for anybody. Nobody's going to really want to mess with Karl-Anthony Towns, because if you look at a lot of the elite teams, they don't necessarily have a center that can match up with Towns.
No.
That, and if you're like the Warriors, do you really want to go against Jimmy Butler and Wiggins? Like, it's not like it's going to be a cakewalk. And I see the Warriors probably still winning 4 or 5 games tops, but it's one of those things where you have to exert more energy than you would like to in the first round.
Yeah, I honestly think that the Timberwolves, whoever they play, I think they have a good enough young core and these guys that are hungry. Like a Karl-Anthony Towns, I believe he will be a great NBA player. I believe he'll be a Hall of Fame player. And I think he just has that type of edge where he'll do enough that he'll be able to win a game against one team in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think, if they scrape in for an 8th seed, as we all likely think, they would put up much more of a fight than the Portland Trailblazers did last year, just because that Cat is so elite and has so much of a ceiling. Wiggins does it as well. And Jimmy Butler is, pushing for a top 10 position in terms of NBA elite talent.
And I don't see this defensive rating. They were 27th last year. I don't see a team that added Jimmy Butler and adding a guy like Taj Gibson while having Jeff Teague falls or is 27th in defensive rating. I mean, I don't see this team being that bad defensively either.
I think Jimmy Butler just gives you an instant boost, and like we said, I think Karl-Anthony Towns will improve defensively because he'll be able to limit his workload a little bit more offensively. It's definitely a lot of bright things for the Timberwolves next year. But realistically, what do you think is going to happen?
I think they're going to push for high 40s wins. I'm going to go with 49, which I think would be a great result for Tibbs and the squad.
Yeah, I'm rolling with you too, Jack. I got 49 wins for their actual prediction.
I'm a shade lower. I'm at 48, but all around the same realm. I don't think they land that top 4 seed. Like I said, I think, one goes – I'm not going to say all my picks right now, but, the Warriors, the Rockets, OKC, and the Spurs will all be up there. And the turnover on this roster, and they still have improvement they need to make. What do you think realistically is going to happen in the postseason? Do you see them getting to the second round? Do you see it being a first-round knockout? Could they beat a team like San Antonio in round 1?
Look, I think that they can, just because Jimmy Butler has that experience. Jeff Teague has playoff experience. Taj Gibson has playoff experience. So it's not that they don't have guys now that don't have postseason experience. And they can, show the realms to guys like Cat and Andrew Wiggins and Tyus Jones. Jamal Crawford's a seasoned veteran, has been there many times, especially with the Clippers over the past few seasons. I think that they're, like you mentioned, Nick, earlier, they're likely to get knocked out in the second round. But I certainly think that if they get a decent seed and a decent matchup in that first round, that you're not going to want to see them in that first round or the second for that matter.
Well, I guess I'll give my hot take. Unless they get the 4th seed, this team doesn't make it out of the first round. I think if they're a 5 seed or a 6 seed, you're going to lose to, like we mentioned, one of those top 4 teams. I have them as a 5 seed, and I'll just say it now, I have OKC as being the 4 seed. And I don't think the Timberwolves can beat OKC in the first round series in the best of 7. I think there'll be a lot for OKC to handle. I think it'll be a good series, but I wouldn't pick them to win in a matchup like that. Or if they have to face the Spurs or the Rockets, I just don't think they're there yet.
Yeah, I think, Jack, you mentioned it, guys like Jimmy Butler, Jeff Teague, and Taj Gibson have experience, but, I'm not really worried about Towns, but I'm worried about some of the young guys. Like, I don't know how Andrew Wiggins will react or some of the young guys on the bench. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And I think the Spurs, like Pop is just not he's not going to lose in the first round. It's happened before, but it's highly unlikely. And a team like OKC with the veterans they have, if Carmelo and Paul George were to go to OKC this year and lose in round 1 to a team like the Timberwolves, that would not settle well with the media or anybody in OKC or all their fans.
No.
But let's move on to the truth. So honestly, guys, I'm sorry I do not have a great emoji today. It's kind of basic, and I'm ashamed of myself.
So, you should be.
All I have is the star emoji because they finally added a star to this team. They added a Jimmy Butler to kind of help these other pieces move. So I think that's going to kind of be a shining light for them and kind of help everybody else and give them some brightness.
I have 5 emojis here, so stay with
What?
So I've got a baby, I've got a puppy, and I've got an arrow. Then I've got a man with a beard, and I've got a wolf. So they've gone from baby dogs, baby puppies, to wolf. So like I've taken over, Nick. I'm now the emoji king, aren't I? Sure.
I mean, five is a lot, so I got to give you props for this one. You definitely came coming from my head in this episode.
But is quantity always quality?
In America, you guys live in America. You're the home of Supersize Me. Come on.
Fair enough. I'll put a little respect on that. So the emoji I'm gonna go with is the guy who like has his arms, like his fingers touching above his head.
Yeah.
I'm doing that because I feel like it's time to rejoice if you're in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I really don't know what this emoji does, but I feel like he's really happy about something. He's like about to do like he's doing like a little ballerina spin. Like he's about to be like, yeah, I don't know, something out of SpongeBob.
Have you ever used this emoji before?
No, I have not actually. I was scrolling through. I really didn't know what to pick, and this was the first one I saw. So I figured I'd make some kind of crazy meaning for it. So this is Minnesota fans being happy that they get to see playoff winning basketball for once. They get to see their team in the first time since the Kevin Garnett era truly compete for something. I mean, Kevin Love's teams are okay, but they never made the playoffs, so who cares about Kevin Love era? Timberwolves. The Kevin Garnett era was fun, but this is the future. Like if you're a Timberwolves fan right now, I'm sure they have a bunch of more fans getting Jimmy Butler and Jeff Teague. It's a good time to be in Minnesota when there's really not normally a good time to be in Minnesota.
Yeah, I think that is very true, and it's kind of ironic if you think about it. The last time they were really relevant, they had one of the best bigs in the NBA in Kevin Garnett, and now they're finally relevant again, and they have one of the best bigs in Karl-Anthony Towns. So the last time Minnesota was relevant was when Brett Favre was on the Vikings, and that's not even basketball. I hate the Vikings, but I got to give them some support this year. They're looking pretty good, but we'll save that for another day. League pass wise, where do you rank this team 1 through 10?
Giving them another high one, fellas. I'm going 8. These Wolves are going to be super fun to watch. Especially that big three. Really excited to see where Wiggins and Cat take their games as well. They're one of my league pass must-watch teams.
A little yawn there for you. I'm just kidding. That was not an indication of my league pass vote. That was just an unfortunate timing scenario. I'm going with a 7.5.
Ooh.
I think they're going to be enjoyable. I think with Butler, Wiggins, and Towns, that's going to be must see. And I'm a big guy, Jeff Teague, as we know. I'm interested to see what Thibodeau can do with this starting 5. I'm wondering what the defense is going to be, if anything. So yes, this is definitely one of my top 10 teams to watch this year.
That's huge for you, Kory. You're like the Simon Cowell of league pass rating.
It's true, actually. I like that. That's a good one. That's going to be my Twitter bio, the Simon Cowell of NBA podcast.
For me, I'm going higher than Kory on this. I have 8 out of 10. That's the highest anybody can get other than the Warriors. So Timberwolves are going to be huge to watch. Karl-Anthony Towns, all the young guys. We'll see how Jimmy Buckets works in there. But you'd watch the Timberwolves over what TV show that you like?
I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier pods, guys, but I love my cooking shows. I love a good bit of Top Chef, MasterChef Australia, but I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it, whether you've got it over there. But my third favorite cooking show right now has one of my favorite comedians, Noel Fielding, in it, who I've met. The Great British Bake Off. I love the show. And, if there are any London listeners there, I will probably be egged in the street if they hear me badmouth this show because it is sacrilege over here. But, yeah, The Great British Bake Off, I got to watch Cat. I can't not.
I can't lie. I've saw that show before.
All right. So, damn, I've never seen that show. I don't cook, so
dude. If it's the same show I'm thinking about, like the older woman on the show is sometimes like a straight savage on some of the pastries that they make, right, Jack?
Oh yeah, you got to, and like it's all about the puns. And I mean, you guys obviously know that I love my puns, and there's always a bit of innuendo as well, talking about like soggy bottoms. The British are so repressed. Any little mild joking about some sort of like form of sexual repression. It's hilarious. But jump on it, fellas. You know, even if you don't, you can learn how to bake some cupcakes, Kory, for your girl.
I might need to. I'm in the doghouse far too often. Oh man, we're the TV show is getting thin picking here. So I'm gonna go with South Park.
Ooh,
I haven't used South Park yet. South Park is one of my dirty pleasures. I don't ever watch it like in order, but like if it's on TV and I have nothing else going on and I watch it, there's a 9 out of 10 chance that I'm on the floor crying in laughter.
New South Park is great.
Yes, between I don't even know, between Man Bear Pig and just the constant jokes and the way they make fun of celebrities. I recently watched one where they did what was it? They went ziplining. They just made fun of how boring ziplining really is.
Shaka, bro.
Yes, shaka, bro. Shred the gnar. Like me and my friends have been saying that for the last month because the episode's hilarious.
Shaka, bro.
But hey, it's still on TV. It's one of the few shows that I've mentioned on this podcast that's still live on TV, and I'm picking a basketball team over it.
Yeah, they've been on for a long time, and they're still popular. Like you guys mentioned, it's always a show that's if it's on, you got to watch it. It's gonna make you laugh. For me, I'm gonna, I like the Timberwolves a lot, so I'm gonna use another show that I actually like a lot. And Kory already threw shade at one point, and that's Burn Notice.
Self shade on Burn Notice.
He may have threw shade more than once, but
Oh, did I really pick it twice?
Hint.
Yeah. So Burn Notice is great, but I'm on my 4th time watching it right now, and it just doesn't have the same pop. But every time I watch it, I still pick up on some random fact that Michael Weston will tell you to do in case you're in this situation. So it's always still interesting stuff.
Maybe that 5th time it'll get better.
Yeah, maybe at the 5th time I'll write a book about every random Michael Weston fact that he gives you.
Start a blog and just break down every episode.
Yeah, just OTG is no more. It's just burn off the glass.
Because Nick, we know you have all the time to do that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. But that wraps it up, guys. Thank you, Kory. Thank you, Jack, for hopping on. And as always, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
I'm the dire wolf that got away. Oh, I like the howl. I like the howl.
I swear to God, I'm not making this up. Last night, I was sitting in my room, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning working on some stuff, and I swear to God, there was dogs howling outside. They knew that we were getting ready for the Timberwolves preview, so they kind of were preparing me mentally.
Actually, Nick, I think that was just me.
Maybe.